it would be good to sort of set the tone of today, look at an easy subject and look at really who the Internet of Things is for. I mean, obviously before we get into this in earnest, Rami, for the people who haven't had the pleasure of meeting you, can you just introduce yourself, tell them a bit about the work you do?
Sure. So I'm the managing director of the IoT business at Tele2. And this is my first job, actually. So really, I'm a serial entrepreneur. So I've started many different companies in many different sectors. I founded a company called Wireless, who really was one of the largest IoT MVNOs in the world. And Wireless was sold to Core just before the summer of this year for around $250 million US. And I joined Tele2 in 2013 when Tele2 wanted to really get into the space of IoT, and they had done really nothing. So I was asked by the then CEO of Tele2, Mats Granryd, to really build a strategy for Tele2, which I did, and then presented it to him and his management team and the owners of Tele2, and they fell in love with it, and then begged me to join them to start the business, which I did, and here we are.
Excellent, thank you. So I think every single one of us in the room has been exploring the Internet of Things for several years. I mean, across technology, across business, across transformational implications. I think in discussions that we've had internally at Mobile Europe and European communications, one area that maybe has been underexplored is the people at the end of the chain, both on the consumer or indeed the enterprise side. And I was wondering, from your perspective, I mean, do you see, given the transformational nature of it, is the Internet of Things going to be like a public good, such as roads or infrastructure? Or is it going to be more a thing that belongs to the companies prepared to fund it, prepared to build it?
Sure. So I think let's take a step back, and I think if you take a macro view of what is happening on our little globe today, how many of you have heard about the Overshoot Day? No hands. Bengt, come on, the Overshoot Day.
2 hands.
2 hands, okay. So the Overshoot Day is the day when during the year, when we consume more of the resources that the world or the globe can actually produce. And this year it happened in August. Next year, in 2017, it's predicted to happen in July, meaning that we're consuming more and more of our world's resources. So combined with that, we're of course not getting fewer people on our little planet. We're becoming more. And we're not becoming younger, we're becoming older. And unfortunately, we're not becoming healthier, we're becoming sicker. So when you look at all of those, is that me? Okay. So when you look at all of those macro changes, of course, these are going to be exponentially driven, and exponential problems needs exponential solutions. And I would argue that digitalization is part of that solution, and IoT is part of digitalization. So needless to say, we need to be able to become smart of how we live on the planet. So that's, of course, for the greater good of everybody. Now, where is the real value going to be created in the short term? For sure, it's going to be in the business area, B2B. This is where you are going to be able to become much more efficient with the way that you run and optimize and drive your businesses. It's going to be about how you communicate with your customers, how you sell products and convert those products into services. It's going to be how you differentiate in a marketplace. So I think short term, it's for sure the B2B area. Long term, when you look at things like smart cities happening, there is going to be a very positive societal effect where you are going to see improvements in traffic. We're not going to have people stuck on trains, right? You are going to reduce pollution. You are going to be able to optimize healthcare. There are lots of things that are going to come hand in hand with deploying IoT in societies today.
So because obviously companies promising a cure-all for all problems is nothing new, but how are you actually going to encourage A, engagement, or B, educate consumers or enterprises as to the benefits? Because surely that is quite the challenge.
Yeah, I would argue that you're absolutely right when it comes to consumers. You know, consumers. I was at an event yesterday here in London, and I spoke, and the question was: is there a demand from the consumer side for these types of solutions? Do I really want my washing machine to be connected, and what's the upside for me? And I think this is very much, when you talk about the consumer part, I think it's very much a generation question. You know, you look at, I have a much younger sister. She's 25, so much younger. And you know, for her, she prefers the world of OpEx rather than CapEx, meaning that she doesn't really have a desire to go out and buy a washing machine, but she would really prefer to buy the service of what the washing machine actually produces. So I think what you will see over the next sort of 10, 15, 20 years is that the new generation that is growing up and becoming actually consumers of solutions and products, they're going to drive that change from moving from buying actual products and paying with CapEx to moving over to services and more of an OpEx model. So I think that's what's going to happen there. So it's going to be a very much long-term change in the consumer market. On the B2B side, I would argue that we're seeing huge changes there. We are seeing tremendous uptake in the B2B market across the board when it comes to implementing IoT. And I think that comes from really, it stems from I would argue, fear. And the fact of the matter is that if you don't change and become digital in the way that you operate your business, you are no longer going to be in business. It's really that simple, because you're not going to be able to compete. A typical example of that is one of our larger customers called ESAB, which is a welding manufacturer. And you know, the welding industry is an oligopoly, so you have 4 or 5 very large welding manufacturers, and then you have a whole host of smaller players. And ESAB was ranked number 3 in the world, and their biggest competitor was a Chinese manufacturer. And you know, historically they could say that, well, their product wasn't as good as ours, and you know, they didn't ship on time. But truth be told, today that's no longer the case, right? You know, you're seeing, for example, Asian and Indian manufacturers not only being on par on quality, actually being better. So how do you differentiate as a Western manufacturer towards that kind of competitor? Well, you have to start engaging with the customer differently. So this is about customer engagement. So what they did, they started a concept within their organization called data-driven advantage. And really what the essence of that was that they wanted to be able to compete with their Chinese and Indian competitors by being able to give their customers more information on an ongoing basis on what their machines were doing and how they were optimized and shipping them the right chemicals at the right time and whatnot, right? So I think businesses are today implementing IoT, starting to implement IoT en masse from the simple reason that they really need to compete. And this is a competitive edge if you implement it correctly. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. No, I mean, you talked about your sister and the generational approach. I mean, one area that I think this also relates to, in the consumer space at least, is the issue of data. I was wondering, I mean, from Tele2's findings, I mean, do you think consumers need to know, or do they even care what happens to their data when it comes to the Internet of Things?
Yeah, so I think, again, there is a, and you have to excuse me for going back to the generation discussion, but I think, you know, you talk about my mother. Mm-hmm. She's now close to 70. And of course, for her, that's a very big question. You know, where is my data? Who handles it? Who manages it? What can they do with it? Are they going to offer me lots of things? Am I going to have 20 salespeople calling me every day on my mobile phone to sell me new stuff because I just bought a pair of pants in H&M or whatever it might be, right? You know, so I think, whereas my sister on the other hand, she couldn't care less, you know. So I think, again, you have a generational situation that you need to cater to. But then I think the players in the IoT industry, such as ourselves and all the other telcos and other players that are providing hardware and end-to-end solutions, you know, I think we need to, for sure, spend a lot of time and focus on security from a technology perspective. But I think most importantly, and what we've done pretty damn bad actually up until today, is a concept in Latin called caveat emptor, which really is about letting the buyer beware, right? I think what we need to do much better is actually to inform our consumers or B2B customers about what is actually happening with their data, and allowing then the customer to actually define how they want their data to be managed. I think that's really what we've done poorly up until today. We haven't actually communicated properly. You know, if you look at, I can only speak for Tele2 in this instance, you know, we are spending millions and millions on ensuring that the data actually doesn't end up in the wrong hands. But we're not communicating it well at all. So I think we need to be much better at communicating that to our customers and asking them what they actually want.
And do you have any early findings so far in terms of what it is they actually want?
Again, it's very dispersed, and you know, we're a global player, right? So we have customers in 167 countries. Can you believe that? How many countries are there in the world? 169? I don't know. But and again, I think it's very different for different markets. Well, to one extent, you have regulatory issues, right? So in some markets, the data can't actually leave a country. In some other markets, you can actually move data around. So I think that's one aspect that one would have to understand. And then, of course, it also comes down to different types of organization, different verticals. Security players want to manage their data themselves in their own data centers, in their own data halls. They are not very open to use open source solutions. They don't want to use Amazon or IBM or Microsoft as data storage houses. They want to use it themselves. Some other players are very happy to use external parties to manage their data. So I think it's very much comes down to the individual customer, actually.